Well, good morning, everybody. How are we doing? All right. Well, I didn't think anything of it when I saw the shorts because I actually lead the Florida office of FMI. So everyone thinks Florida, we sit underneath palm trees and drink fruity drinks. So it's kind of nice, actually. Very casual, but I do want to thank you guys for having me back. This is always exciting, and particularly talking about what we're going to be talking about now, the concept of dictation or collaboration. And some of you, I think it was in the Connector magazine, I published an article several months ago when your magazine was issued. And the concept came up as I was sitting here watching so many of my contractor friends go through this exercise of getting work and being so singularly focused on the get work process, they sometimes forget about the doing work process. And more importantly, that transition from the get work side to the do work side. The estimator's going, well, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to spend time bringing the PMs and field managers up to speed, or do you want me to go out and get more work? And it's somewhat of a conundrum that we have. I will say this, I've actually noticed a very positive trend, and I'm going to put a caveat asterisk on it, and I'll explain. One of the things I've noticed fairly recently with businesses is we're seeing more and more, field collaboration, or maybe your superintendents and foremen come into the office to, just give the estimators a hand, maybe look at the project, give it another set of eyes. Mainly we're doing that because we have the capacity, we have the ability, especially with talented folks. We want to hold on to them. What's fascinating for me is we're doing that and it's the right behavior. The one fear that I have as we move forward and we start to continue to come out of this funky recession, recovery, whatever you want to term it, and my big fear is, do we get away from that behavior as we get busy again? Think about 5-6 years ago when things were rocking and rolling and we had more work than we knew what to do with, and we also were running really thin on resources. I'd constantly hear people say, Greg, we can't find good people out there. Well, once again, now my big concern is what happens when the market shifts. Do we get away from that best practice? Some of the things we're going to talk about in this session, wow, that's a hideous picture. All right, we're going to move on. Some of the things we're going to talk about in particular, why do we have impediments to planning? I think before we can talk about the best practice, we've got to understand why they actually occur and what's restricting us from doing the right things. And we're going to talk about my favorite topic, lessons from SEAL Team 6. And you're probably thinking, what the heck are you talking about? I thought this was on pre-job planning. We'll show you in a moment. Then we're going to talk about what I refer to as the best practice, the keys to successful planning, the process, and the tool. Those are two very important pieces, but I would say it's probably 15 to 20% of the issue in most organizations. 80% of the issue lies in human behavior. Once again, you're going to see that in a little bit. You're going to see some of the challenges. It's not about the spreadsheet or the PowerPoint presentation or even getting your team to kind of go through in a consistent process. The challenge is changing behavior, getting your get work team to say, we're going to have to break behavior, we're going to have to collaborate and talk about this project in a little bit greater depth than we usually do. This, for me, is the money. This is where you make and lose your money. It's called the stand and deliver. And if you take anything out of the discussion we're having today, you'll figure a way to incorporate the stand and deliver in your projects. And we'll go into a lot more depth. Planning accountability, how do we change that behavior? We'll go into that a little bit more. And then the benefits of consistent tools and processes. So first and foremost, what are the impediments? I have a client, they talk about, actually they don't even use the word fast track scheduling anymore. Mainly because everything's fast track. They brand themselves as the hyper track contractor. Apparently that's the really fast construction. The moral of the story is we can't plan, Greg, because we're moving too fast. There's too many moving pieces to keep things going. Customer demands, we were awarded this project on a Friday, we got to start erecting on Monday. Oh, wait a second here, it doesn't even make sense. Not only we don't even have the materials, we don't even have our shop drawings, and what are they expecting? Poor construction documents. I don't know if we have any engineers or designers sitting in the room. I am sorry, but once again, I continually hear from people, the designs are horrible. They're not what they should be. And this is not referring to your detailers. I want to be clear on that. This is, once again, coming further upstream. You get a document that looks a little bit something like this, and this is what you're supposed to build a $10, $20 million facility off of. Lack of discipline, holding the standard, creating the standard within your company. I work with a mechanical contractor up in Green Bay, Wisconsin. So I'd say $55, $65 million a year business. They have 14 project managers, 16 ways of doing things. Now, let me rephrase that. They did prior to kind of working through some of their issues. But they actually submitted 2 bids to the same customer one time. It wasn't a either or. It was they were that just ill prepared to do the work. Basically, every PM was his or her own estimator. They had their own fax cover sheets, their own letterhead, their own systems, their own processes. They had no discipline. They might as well have been called Martha's Mechanical Engineering or Bill's Sheet Metal Shop, because that's what they were. It was a group of individuals, not an organization. Now, once again, that company may be a little bit bigger than your organization, but even if you have 2 people in your business, what is the standard of performance? What's the best practice? Lack of the internal standard and poor organizational structure. I see this consistently. Well, we have this guy over here who's an estimator / project manager, but then we have a project manager and estimator over here, but then we have a guy who's also in the field but also in the office. We've got to figure out the one standard for our organization. That hybrid version is very dangerous, and we're almost creating an organizational structure that supports individual behavior rather than harnessing all that. And once again, that may require some training. I know some of you sat through the session a few moments ago about the training exercises. We have to train people. I'm going to go in a little bit more depth about that at the conclusion. When we look at the life cycle, from the time a project is conceived till the time that pretty much we're either commencing construction, the cost to implement changes from your perspective gets very, very difficult. Obviously, the further upstream, the further we can get deep into the planning versus our, once again, as we go further down the line, the ability to influence goes down. But the cost to make changes in our business, and when you look at the crews that we have on our job sites, that's like a locomotive stopping and starting. And it's very difficult to pull the reins back once people are out on that job site. I'm going to tell you what planning is not. First of all, it's not a handoff or a turnover. If you have that vernacular in your business where you call, we have our handoff meeting or the turnover meeting, just change it. I'm going to debunk myth number 1 on pre-job planning. Because to me, what that says is literally our planning is like handing the baton in a relay race. So here you go, Mike. And pretty soon the estimator, he can't get that set of plans and spec out of his hands quick enough. It's like the booger you can't get off your finger. He just wants to push that thing down. Unfortunately, is that truly planning? No, it's a handoff. Planning is planning. A turnover is literally handing over documents. Now, here I'm going to put a caveat on it again. I recognize the fact that there is some point in the process where you have to have said turnover. But if your planning stops or your process stops at that handoff, it's not planning. So we're going to go in a little bit more depth in a moment. It's not just simply a checklist where we go down and we do the old pencil whipping and we say, yep, got it, we got the plans, we got the specs. It's not that. It's not a software package. I'm not up here selling software. There is no software for planning. People get confused when I say planning and say, well, we do scheduling, Greg. We use Primavera or whatever the latest version is. That's not what we're talking about. Creating a schedule is probably part of planning. Reliance on your customers' pre-construction planning. Once again, in our stream of consciousness, where we are in the construction life cycle, we may look at our general contractors or CMs and go, well, they're not doing good planning. So, if they're not planning, that almost should increase our desire to plan and hopefully kind of expose some of those bugs that we're going to come up against. And I think the other piece of this is that planning is simply limited to large, sophisticated contractors and fabricators. Only the big folks can do it, the Turners and Skanskas of the world. No, planning is simple. Whether you're a one-man or woman operation or you have 200, 300 people in your business, it doesn't matter. It's not limited to the level of sophistication of those large businesses or small businesses. It's a best practice you should be doing. Now, this is an interesting segue. Got these interesting guys over here. I'm going to go over a couple facts that you probably were aware of. Back on May 2nd, there was a raid in Islamabad, Pakistan. Those of you who followed the news, you know what the end result was. The group, obviously the SEALs and most of our military loves all the acronyms. In this case, it was DEV Group. And obviously, those of you that follow the story, it was SEAL Team 6, the SEAL team that supposedly doesn't exist. They use everything from satellite surveillance, wiretaps, couriers, you name it, to figure out and gathered intelligence to conduct this raid. Tactical planning for the event that started on May 2nd was about 5 to 7 months. We'll choose 6 months for sake of argument. Now, some people might say, well, Greg, technically it was 10 years, but I'll let you noodle on that for a second. Here's the other piece. According to the New York Times, the raid, consisting of 79 commandos and a dog, lasted 38 minutes. It was projected to last 30 minutes. I tell you all this because here is the payoff. Within our SEAL Team 6 analysis, there were 6 months of planning, or roughly 241,000 minutes of planning. Based on this ratio, for 38 minutes of execution, for every 1 minute of execution, there was 6,400 minutes of planning. Y'all follow the math so far? Now, what I want to do is take this to the construction project for a moment and follow the analogy. Using a 6-month construction project, mainly because I kind of pulled something out of the air, but I'd say an average erection job may last 6 to 7 months, but for sake of argument, we'll go with 6 months. Using our SEAL Team 6 ratio, you should have spent at least 1,540,000,000 man-minutes of planning, or 2.5 hours, 2.5 million hours. That's a lot of numbers there. Y'all follow that? Here's the interesting part. Most construction companies will only spend between 0 to 2 hours in construction planning for a 6-month job. Isn't that fascinating? Now, some will say to me, well, Greg, that's a really stretch of an analogy. I mean, that SEAL Team 6, that was such an important seminal event in our country's history. It was life or death. I mean, you had people that were rappelling from helicopters. I mean, that's a dangerous business. Well, your folks every single day, this is the second riskiest business, not from a financial risk, but just for the fact you got guys and gals hanging off steel, doing something very, very dangerous. And they do it every day on projects. Now, I'm not espousing that we should spend 1.5 billion man-minutes of planning. However, do we even do a fraction of what we should as a business? And the answer is no. So, this is what I typically see in most organizations, what I call the process flow chart. Very consultancy of me to talk about. First of all, award is certain. The low bidder's notified, we select the personnel. Usually, at a minimum, we select the project manager. We may or may not be able to select the foreman or superintendent because they may not be available yet. Then we prepare a job book. And maybe the job book is everything from some cut sheets. Maybe we start the detailing process. We maybe do a download of information. I've heard that word quite a bit. We assemble the field team, and then the work commences. Now, some of you sitting in the audience say, well, what's wrong with that, Greg? I don't see any problem. My question to you is, how much time was spent even before this in planning the bid? How much input was garnered from the field in planning the bid? That's the first question. The other piece of it is this handoff, or what I refer to as dropping the hand grenade over the wall. I was spent this week with a bunch of mechanical contractors in Orlando, Florida. And here was the interesting piece. We had 7 mechanical contractors as part of a peer group talking about how they do their planning. And in some of them, he said, the guy was real embarrassed, and he said, I'm almost embarrassed to talk about this. He goes, but normally for us, we create that job book. The estimator, he can't get done with that job book quick enough. And he'll put it in a nice 3-ring binder, and then he'll plop it in the foreman's mailbox. Plop it in there, call up the foreman and say, hey, come by and pick up your job book. You got to be out there on Tuesday. That was the level of planning in their business. It's not too dissimilar from this. So we're going to talk about what I view as the right way. First of all, the handoff. In this case, the flaws in this process is simply we're focused on the physical transmission of data. The plans, the specs, maybe the details, the map to the job site. That's, once again, it's more of a dictation versus a collaborative effort. The planning of the project in the estimating phase lacks field input. As I said when my initial story, the behavior I'm seeing now is we're not asking our field superintendents to become estimators necessarily, but asking them their approach. All too often we hear at the end of projects, if we do this and do a post-mortem, the field guy says, well, unfortunately, you didn't put enough money in the budget. The estimator goes, no, you just didn't use the right amount of money. And we get this kind of pulled from the left and the right. Versus maybe up front figuring out what the right number should be. And once again, doing it for what you can actually do it for. In this case, where was the discussion of game-winning strategies? Discussion centering on the facts and less where the money will be made. For instance, when we look at some of these projects, do we actually get into how we're going to better the budget? How we're going to tackle job-specific safety hazards? No, not when we're creating a job book and just pushing it out as quick as possible. So some of the things, the flaws in what I refer to as the standard process. This is that moment of reflection for you. If your process in your business right now looks more like this, and if it's a very one-sided conversation where only the estimator is doing the talking, or more importantly, you may say, well, Greg, we have estimators and project managers, not estimators/project managers. That's fine. I'm fine with that. But in some cases, the fall down is how far down do we push the information? How far down in your business does this concept of creating a job-winning strategy go? Do we limit it to just that project manager? And because if we're late to pull the trigger on finding that foreman or superintendent, we're missing the boat. That would be a lot like the people at the Pentagon talking about that SEAL Team 6 raid, talking about all the tactics, but forgetting to bring the SEAL Team operators into the room and talking about, hey, what do you think about this? And I can guarantee you, if you watched any of the 60 Minutes programs and the videos on that SEAL Team 6 raid, you will notice that those guys practiced. They practiced, every step from the time they rappelled from the helicopter to the time they went through the building. They probably built a mock-up of what that building looked like in Pakistan. But once again, that's pushing the information down to the people that need it the most, not holding on to it at the management level, or in that case, the senior Pentagon officials. So what I refer to as the true collaborative process. First of all, you'll notice my process starts with award of certain. What is that? Well, it could be anything from you get a purchase order, you get a work order, you get a contract, maybe you get a verbal. Once again, we're not saying start work without a contract. What I'm saying is start planning. And you know better than anybody what award of certain should be based on. If you're doing work for government agencies, well, you can probably go on the fact that they're telling you you're low because they can't go back and manipulate. If you're working for some GCs, you might want a little more certainty. But in a lot of cases, we wait too long to pull the trigger on planning, and then we get kind of pushed back. And I'll tell you a quick story on this. I actually have a general contractor up in Connecticut. And what was interesting with this contractor is they do a lot of work for stores like Abercrombie and Fitch, Hollister, all the places I kind of shop at. And one of the things that I noticed with these guys, they get awards because most of these retail outlets They don't know, they're not builders, but they say we want to be in by Black Friday or Cyber Monday, whatever that case might be. But they'll pull the trigger real late on starting construction. Well, what will happen is they'll get an award on Friday, and that owner will say, you need to be out here on Monday. And you know what? They jump through themselves to absolutely be out there on Monday. Unfortunately, what they forget in the process is the planning. And they said, well, Greg, we don't have time to plan. Look at what are we supposed to do? And I said, well, you got a couple options. And really, it's that simple. A, don't start on Monday. And they said, whoa, Greg. You can't tell Mr. Abercrombie or Mr. Fitch we're not starting on Monday. I said, here's the problem. We have a very distorted perception of planning. Most of us do not think of planning as being work. And in fact, done in its truest form, it is planning. It's just not the same as putting steel in the air and welding or securing fasteners. We're talking about planning in its truest form is exhausting. But God forbid we call up back a customer and say, hey, certainly we'll start on Monday. We're going to go through our ABC Steel pre-construction process and get kicked off. We'll be mobilized on Tuesday. They said, we can't do that. Our customer won't go for that. Okay, well, that's option one. Option two is you send a bunch of people out there, and you could go ahead and probably use Saturday and Sunday to do some of your planning and collaborative sessions. But what you're doing is you're forsaking planning completely to start the project. You might even send some people out there on Monday to do some small ticky-tack stuff, but you're doing the planning in parallel. Point is, there's a couple options here. To me, planning, just saying we can't do planning is not one of them. So now we create what I call the homework packages. So we know award is certain. Oh boy. We create these homework packages. The homework packages, I err to the side of being very minimalist. What I'm saying is your plans, your specs, maybe a safety plan, a budget. The thing that I want to make sure of is you could create a job book this thick. And the idea of homework is we want our field manager and project manager, assuming they're different people, to spend some time and digest what's going on in that homework package. That's the first step. We give them too much information, they're not going to look at any of it. But go with the critical pieces. We then create a top 10 questions list. In that process, we want them to go through and flip through the sheets and create questions. I can, just looking at some of the drawings that are produced by some of the engineering firms that are out there, they're not that great. There should be a lot of questions that come up. How are we going to integrate with the other trades? How are we going to integrate with the concrete contractor? Get those questions down and codified. Next thing is we create the the pre-construction meeting one, and we use a standard agenda, and I'll show you that in a moment. But we go through it, and you'll be able to gauge if the discussion is more than one-sided, you have a good pre-construction process. If the estimator's doing all the talking, someone hasn't done their homework. But most of the people in the room are going to have to stay at about a 30,000-foot level and make sure they have these discussions and kind of be very objective in that process. We leave with an action plan. Not everything in that first pre-construction meeting is going to be done. But we're going to capture those actions and make sure we talk about them. Then we go ahead and we maybe have a second meeting for our field manager. This may be the project manager handoff, and this is the actual field manager handoff and meeting. All I'm going on is if you have estimators / managers or estimators and managers, you may need 1 or 2 meetings depending on that. You could easily also do this all together. But the moral of the story is this is the process flow that I like. And we have that second pre-construction meeting, the action plan follow-up. This is where the operations manager, or maybe you as an executive, go through and make sure things got checked off. Did we follow up on those actions that were listed? Then we start the process of the stand and deliver preparation. Stand and deliver is simply this. We get the team together, and their job is to figure out how they're going to build this job successfully and beat the budget. Now, it's not just creating this kind of discussion forum. What their job as the PM, estimator, and field manager, they're going to come back and stand and deliver to you, the senior executive. So they come back in front of Bruce and maybe Bruce's management team, and their job is to say how we're going to make you money, how we're going to make this company money. And this is a fascinating story because I work with a road builder up in Detroit, Michigan. Actually, it's a bridge builder. This was funny. When we created this process and created this whole flow for the stand and deliver, the PM and the estimator, really smart engineers, really good guys, they had the plan to a T. But in that room, we had also the field manager. And the field manager was quiet the entire stand and deliver. So the PM is standing there. They have a little PowerPoint presentation, and they're presenting to the senior management team, saying how they're going to build this bridge. And I'm kind of sitting like a fly on the wall, but I'm noticing John, the superintendent, hasn't said a word this entire time. And interestingly enough, the president of the company, his name is Mike. Mike noticed it too. And I got to tell you, this was phenomenal. Mike sat there, and as soon as they got done, they said, "Okay, guys, you got any questions for us?" Mike said, "I do." And he looked at the superintendent and said, "Mr. Superintendent, I'm curious, how do you plan on handling MOT, maintenance of traffic, for the non-DOT folks out there?" A superintendent, and this is one of those you want to jump on the grenade, because I saw the words coming out of his mouth before he said it. He said, "Mike, that's a great question. I haven't really thought about it yet. I'm going to have to think about that before I get started." Well, that for the folks in the room that don't know a lot about maintenance of traffic, that's kind of a slam dunk meatball pitch that any bridge builder or DOT person would know instantaneously. But you could tell that superintendent wasn't engaged. Mike he's a real quiet guy. He's not one to really get emotional or kind of, pound his chest. He sat there and said, "Oh, okay. All right." Gathered up his stuff. And everyone's looking at him like, what is he doing? We're not done yet. He goes, "Oh, no, we're done. You're going to come back here next Monday, and you're going to do this presentation again. And you'll only be allowed to mobilize when that guy right there, that field manager, the guy that's on the ground running this project, understands it." Remember I talked about discipline and how we lack discipline? Mike was convinced, and I can guarantee you, as soon as we all walked out of the room, they all probably looked at the superintendent and said, "What did you say that for? I can't believe it. We talked about it." But they came back a week later, and that superintendent knew the plan of attack. He understood what was going on. His head wasn't in it, and this was kind of a guinea pig project for them. They hadn't done on this whole process before. But I guarantee you, he is that much more prepared. And actually, that was 7-8 months ago. That project is doing phenomenally well. They are making money. It's it's not a big secret, just simply the fact that they're planning and they understand where their risks is, and they're hedging their risks. Had they not gone back and allowed that superintendent to truly get immersed in the project, they would have been hurting. But let me tell you, this stand and deliver is one of the key areas where the money will be made. Now, your part in this process as a senior management is what I call the Mike role, or the devil's advocate, what Mike did. He could have easily just said, "Oh, great presentation, guys," and graded them on their presentation skills like a Dale Carnegie course. He graded them on, do they understand the scope? And ask the tough questions. I'd much rather ask a PM a tough question sitting in the room and have him look back at me and go, "Wow, I hadn't thought about it." There's a difference. We're not going to initially stop the meeting because a PM can't answer the question, but it was grossly apparent the superintendent was not engaged and hadn't really thought about it. But we want to get those probative questions out there. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if it snows for 6 weeks? What if it rains? What if you can't get the steel when you need it? What's your contingency plan? How are you going to stage the trucks on your job site? What does that look like? And hopefully, it's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to make your operations folks dance. But that's okay. I want them to dance here, not dance on the job site where it costs you thousands of dollars. So some of the other things that we've got to consider is planning never ends. And once again, if we have multiple trades or we have multiple parts of our business and we're almost acting like the general or the prime contractor, we have to go through what I call the global trade contractor supplier coordination. This may be shocking, but some of the smaller folks that maybe work for you as a business, they're not that sophisticated, and the only planning they're going to get is the planning that you offer them. So once again, we're going to go through this, and we're going to talk about firm-wide standards, project-wide standards, and maybe trade-wide standards, kind of driving that down. Firm-wide standards is what do we expect from a safety, paperwork, billing, things that doesn't matter who you necessarily are. Project-wide, we're going to talk about logistics, utilization, start asking them, hey, what are you going to do relative to your crew size or your crew blend? And if they don't have a good answer, we can push back, and let's make sure we answer those questions now. Then we're going to talk about trade specific. If we're talking about decking or we're talking about joists or purlins or whatever it might be, let's go through those very specific best practices. You all know a million things that, just from the experience you have as steel folks, things that have maybe mistakes that have occurred on job sites, and you've created a body of knowledge. Some of you may even have gone so far as to make a body of knowledge in your business, and you have a lessons learned library that sits on your shelf. Others, it's all up here. Here's an opportunity to share some of those things. I call them the bugaboos. You get those bugaboo lists together, and hey, let's talk about that and make sure that you don't make the same mistake one of our other trade partners made the mistake on. How we're going to manage the customer, regardless of expectations, let's make sure we get the customer engaged. And once again, they may not have a pre-construction meeting, but we can push back. We can help manage the customer. I think that's almost foreign to some of us as well. Wait a second, I can ask the customer for that? Demonstrate your plan of attack and show them. And we're seeing it more and more. The structural steel folks, in some cases the mechanical, electrical, they're acting more like prime contractors, and they're driving the bus. They're making some of these CMs and GCs almost obsolete. This is a trend that we're seeing, but to actually do that and provide value, you have to have your ducks in the row and you have to go through a process. Exit strategy. Once again, beginning with the end in mind. Remember I told you about the guys that up in Connecticut that will jump through hoops to just get out there and get started on Monday morning. Here's the issue, and excuse my French, but they suck at finishing. I mean, they are horrible at finishing. So here comes Black Thursday, Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, and they're working like countless hours, and they're unfortunately bleeding money because they have to do whatever it takes to finish so that store opens. And maybe finishing on Black Friday isn't realistic, maybe the week before. But the moral of the story is, this is what your customer remembers. Not how you start, but how you finish. And unfortunately, if you don't have the exit strategy, you don't carry this concept of planning, the best practice, once again, this is another checklist item, do you have an exit strategy in your firm? A firm-wide process that, and most likely, is pre-job planning for the last 10% of the project. So you get to this 90% point, and you've got most of the steel erected, more or less. Unfortunately, we got to send Mike, the superintendent, to another job. He's getting started. So we bring on Steve, the new superintendent, and this is where we start to fall down because we don't finish as strong as we possibly should. And this is what the customer remembers about us. And then we wonder why we get bid out against 20 of our closest friends. They go, well, we provide value. Do you really? Because unfortunately, you didn't finish as strong. Or maybe you are doing whatever it takes to finish, but you're finishing at your own expense. Because you're spending the overtime, you're sending out red ticket items, you're purchasing things to keep the job moving. That's called margin erosion, and that eats away at your profitability. So, other three parts of the planning, the true collaborative part, people feel vested. And I don't mean to make this a touchy-feely type discussion, but when I'm involved in something and creating the plan, I'm more apt to actually complete the plan versus simply, here, this is the project, make it happen. I think that's one of the true benefits of a collaborative planning process. the other thing that is important, you probably have heard words like integrated project delivery or IPD. In the truest sense, this is integrated project delivery for your company. It doesn't matter if you're doing a hospital project, it's called IPD or design build. This is integrated project delivery. Time spent in planning by the constructors give way to not only value engineering, but budget saving margin enhancers. This is the opportunity because we're looking at the budget, and if you remember that curve that I showed at the start, we're so far forward in that, we have the opportunity to make change within our project. And most importantly, this firm-wide best practice, we have to create consistency. This is the hard part. As we say in the South, says easy, does hard. Real easy to talk about this process. And maybe you have a couple folks in your business, you go, well, everything Greg described, John and Mary, they do that really well. But how do we make it a firm-wide standard? The other piece to this is the process that I've shown you here, whether or not it exactly looks like what happens at ABC Steel or Brand X Steel, you have to customize it. There's no question about that. It's got to be created to your standard. But the people that are going to use that process should create the process. The biggest fall down in companies that I see is they'll create it in a vacuum, or the ops manager will say, wow, I got this great presentation at the SEAA conference, and I'm going to go back and spend 2 weekends and create our version of it. No, go back, get a couple estimators, a couple project managers, whittle this down, and really challenge them to say, let's create a process map. Let's create a series of tools. This is a series of tools. And by the way, Bruce, I'd like you to read the 4th line down. This is the eye exam. I'm joking. And it actually looks perfectly clear on my screen, but I will be more than happy to send any of these tools to you. This is actually a very generic version. And long story short, I'll kind of go through it because it is impossible to read. On the left-hand side, it's major categories. This is the agenda for the pre-job planning meeting. So we've prepared the homework assignment. People did their homework assignment. And now we go ahead and we actually sit down as a team and we go line item by line item. Hey, there's some things on here that may not apply, but we just check the box. Does not apply. But we go through the plans, the specs, customer management. What are we going to do about document flow? How are we going to handle logistics on this job site? And you can see it's quite long. This is actually a little bit easier to read. This would be more of what I refer to as the global trade contractor. This is, once again, your suppliers and vendors having a planning event for them, pushing the planning downstream. Once again, here's a series of tools, how we're going to handle materials, workmanship, finish, any hot issues. And once again, if we're talking about, we're concerned about the joist provider on this job, and there's some funky joists that we're worried about. This will be an opportunity from our pre-job planning meeting. We identified that as a problem or a potential challenge. This is where we sit down with Mr. Joist Provider and say, look, we're real concerned about the east side of the building. Those are some exotic sections. How are you going to get it? What's your plan of attack? When are you going to start fabricating? Let's go through that process. So this is the hot button issue. Logistics and site planning. This is one of my favorite tools, actually, and this would probably be beneficial for you all to consider. One of my general contractor friends actually created this with us, and we went through and we laminated a site plan. And while these pictures are incredibly horrible and probably aren't even to scale, what we went through, we wanted to figure out how we're going to handle things like where are we going to place the crane, where are we going to stockpile and all our steel. And the worst words a superintendent can say when that truck pulls up on a job site is, put it over there for now. I mean, that just bleeds money. This is an opportunity to go, where are we going to put stuff? So we're not shuffling it around. 60% of the cost of materials is in the handling, folks, because we're just bleeding money. So we got to make sure, let's find a spot on that site. And this is the best part. Like I said, we laminated the site plan. And this one, you could easily just simply show the steel with some dry erase markers and erase. These guys went a step further, actually, and they created, because they were GC and they had a lot of different things going on, but they created mock or little models of cranes. I guess they also had more free time on their hands, but little trailers, and they would move those trailers around, kind of like a war room almost. But the point is, it doesn't even have to be that complicated. You can go to Kinko's FedEx for $1.25 and probably laminate one of these sheets and have a very good constructive dialogue as part of pre-job planning. The stand and deliver some of the essentials that I want you to focus on. Avoid the project almanac. We have in this project 8,000 tons of steel. In this project, we're going to do 10,000 man hours and blah, 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 blah. I don't care about that. I get it. From your level, what I want to know is, where are we going to make money? What are the greatest risks? How are we going to mitigate those risks? How will we better the schedule? And do the people on the front line, like my superintendent friend in Detroit, Michigan, did he understand what was going on? Did we push that down far enough? When I think back to, I was watching the 60 Minutes program on the SEAL Team 6 raid, and I remember hearing President Obama, when he was coming through like the different discussions, well, how did you come up with the plan to do what you did? And he said, well, we had the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but we had the Joint Chiefs of Staff with the SEAL Team commanders come in, and first time they came in, they said they were going to use drones. And they said, no, I don't want to use drones because there's probably going to be too many civilian casualties, and it's going to be too risky. Okay, go back to the drawing board. Then they came back again and said, well, we think we're going to use a helicopter and 36 commandos. Well, what happens if one helicopter crashes? Okay, let's get 2 helicopters. You see the process that they went through, kind of an iterative process. And once again, it's probably frustrating. No one likes to have kind of rocks thrown at them. But at the same time, it probably led to the successful completion. There were no American casualties. Other than the helicopter crashing, which, once again, it's a risk, which we mitigated it as best we possibly could. But those are the things we want to get focused on. The guys in Michigan, we actually created the standardized PowerPoint for them. And I know you're probably saying, what's the point of that? What I didn't want them to worry about was some phenomenal presentation or something that just was, kind of blew the doors off of everything with PowerPoint. And those guys were engineers. They love tinkering, and we can put a cool background and make the things flying. I don't care about that. That doesn't provide value. Answer the fundamental questions and standardize that template. So when the next project team comes in, they have 5 slides. How are you going to make money? What are the biggest risks? What are the mitigation strategies? If you take anything out of this section, that's the true collaborative piece to this. And that's what I call the litmus test for this. If you can sit there on a big project, which is something I'm going to talk about in a second, if you can feel comfortable that those 3 people are going to go out and they're not going to step in something, the whole process went well. That's kind of the benchmark. If they come in and everyone's going, well, I thought you were going to, buy the steel. No, I got the purchase order. I would have the discipline to say, you're not ready. Go back to the drawing board. And as hard as that is to say, especially in the environment we live in right now, we need to do it. Otherwise, we're just going to bleed money. Now, I said something about big projects. You're probably saying, we do maybe a lot of small projects. How could we possibly do a stand and deliver for all our small projects? You probably couldn't. What I would say, there has to be a threshold in your company where you could create a truncated version of this entire process for anything under, let's say, 1,000 man hours. But anything over 1,000 man hours gets this process. The reason I say, and the number I'm coming up with is just completely hypothetical, but I would say in your business, the threshold of small projects and big projects. And you got to find that dividing line. But I would also err to the side, so many people talk themselves out of this process. Well, it's a project that's only around the corner from our office. It's only 1,200 man hours, so it's not really that big. I would much rather learn how to ride a motorcycle, and I'm a klutz, but I would much rather learn to ride it on something smooth and easy, maybe my street, where I'm not exposed to so much risk. The last thing I want to try this on is a project that's got 18,000 tons of steel, and we've never done this process before. Obviously, if you're not doing it to this level, you're going to have to do it eventually. But practice. Start on the small one. Err to the side of being conservative with this and saying, what's the worst thing that would happen? We spend an hour and we discuss a small project and we make a ton of money. Worst things have happened, I'm sure. The slide deck, this is what I would call the slides if you had to create. And I'll also, as I said before, I'll give you a sample slide deck that has this in it. The flow of communication, who's doing what and where, the margin enhancement strategy, cash flow expectations, uncontrollable issues. I realize it's in yellow, probably difficult to read. Your municipality challenges, maybe your weather challenges. And then lastly, controllable, safety, trade partner concerns, and schedule. Maybe your customer, how we're going to manage the customer. What role do you want the executives in your business to play relative to customer management? Your job is, as I said before, and I'll just keep repeating it, is the devil's advocate. Really pushing back. Don't let them off easy. And I know they're going to be frustrated, and you can leave at the end of the day and be friends, but make sure you really expose those areas. Don't let them get out 6 months and then you find the risk areas and go, boy, I thought that was going to be a problem. How often I've heard that when I've done evaluations of business. We knew they were going to be a tough customer. Okay, what do we do to mitigate that if we knew they were going to be a tough customer? Some of the value relative to pre-construction planning, first of all, we're talking about 5 to 7 times return on your investment, simply by doing this. When I think about football in particular, and that used to be one of the analogies I would use a lot with this concept of planning. We just had the Super Bowl about a month ago, but the amount of planning that goes in relative to the amount of time played is insane. It's something like 2,000 man-hours for 12 minutes of football, and I've always loved that, much like the analogy we use with SEAL Team 6. But we're talking about spending that time and scripting the first part of the project, just like the Giants scripted the first 40 plays. Now, they understand that game is going to change, and it's going to evolve, and they're going to have to change their game plan. But at least they had the benchmark to understand that change was occurring. That's what I always love about it. Greg, our projects change too much to plan. And then I sit there and say, well, how do you know they're changing if you didn't have the benchmark to begin with? So just kind of an interesting thought. Greater commitment from the team due to buy-in. Now I've got to talk over the drill. So greater commitment from the team due to buy-in. Yeah, it's that simple. You're getting involvement from your superintendents, your foremen, downstream to where they feel like they're vested in the success in this process. Establishment of project expectations and a baseline. We're putting the target. We're saying we will be done by, and everyone sees that target versus having some nebulous cloud that we're all trying to achieve. Accountability. The key is I think everyone in here understands, and you're probably saying, well, Greg, we know we got a plan. Our problem is we just don't do it. And how do you hold people accountable in your business? And this isn't just accountability relative to pre-job planning. This is accountability across organizations. You probably hold people very accountable when it comes to safety. If you have to be tied off, you have to be wearing hard hats, safety glasses, or whatever it might be. And we hold a very hard line stance on safety, but what about the other parts of your business? So if you ever heard this right here or these two, this is the way we've always done it, Greg. I have a contractor friend in Orlando, Florida. They've been in business over 100 years. And we had to get over that behavioral inertia. That's the word I like to use. Behavioral inertia. And we've done it this way for 100 years. Okay, does that mean it's necessarily the right thing to do? I mean, you watch those movies, what was it, like Mad Men, if you ever watch it on cable and you see those executives and they're all smoking and drinking in their offices. There was a point in time where that was socially acceptable, and that's the way they did things. You wouldn't even think about doing that in 2012. Moral of the story is, if you ever have caught yourself or someone in your business saying, well, this is the way we've always done it, that's the status quo, and that's dangerous for businesses. So one of the things I would suggest is creating some sort of accountability, or call it upstream metric. When I look at this, what we're saying is we've got a compliance metric in place that simply says if we start 5 projects in the month of March, we should have done 5 pre-job planning collaborative sessions. That's how simple this is. And you can have someone be the scorekeeper. You can see this metric is going up. But if you want to manage this effectively, you need to measure it. That which is measured gets managed better. You manage a lot of things in your business. You know, the safety, you measure safety. You probably measure safety just religiously. Lost time incidents, mod rates, you name it. We have all kinds of metrics associated with safety. Create metrics to measure compliance. When people see that you got that scoreboard up, I could easily make other metrics for things like short interval planning, exit strategy, post-job reviews. Start small. If you're not measuring anything right now, start with this. And just put this up in your conference room where people get your coffee, maybe your break room. You know, let them know we will do this standard, and this is what we're going to do. I think I've told this story before. One of my clients in New York, they actually they kind of bucked me on this one. I've been working with them for a couple years, and I said, guys, your problem is you're not holding a standard and you're not measuring it. You know, you've got the tool and the process, but you're forgetting the behavioral side, which is 80% of the battle. And they said, well, Greg, you want us to put up all these graphs. I don't get it. Forget about it. And I said, just promise me. I know you're cynical about it, but they had one of those fishbowl conference rooms. Yeah, a big glass wall on one side, and that's where they put these graphs. You know, that was 4 years ago. To this day, they still have them up there. Their graph hovers in the 80 to 100% on all their metrics. And you know what they also put right beside it was costs. The cost graph goes down, meaning that they're being more efficient, and the compliance is always going up. And I was watching one superintendent walk in one time, and it was great to watch him. I was sitting on the other side of the fishbowl, working on my computer, and I looked up, and I saw the superintendent walk in, and he looked at the graphs. It was like watching a tennis match. His head was going over here. Okay, we're going like this. I mean, he wasn't doing that necessarily, but first of all, he paid attention. He saw something on there and said, uh-oh, management's watching this. You got to do it. This is how you start to adjust the behavioral component. And then lastly, he was saying, I'm doing this, and it's having an impact. There's a corollary, and I get it. And that's what we want people to understand. This isn't rocket science. You know, ironic to Bruce's introduction, I'm not the smartest guy in the room. You guys understand this business. And I think the biggest thing is, your hardest part, though, is changing the behavior. And that's what you're going to cover. Some of you probably have some phenomenal checklists, roadmaps, ISO, Lean, Six Sigma. I get all of it. This one right here, and this is ironic because, you know, if you've read my bio, I've got more engineering experience than I can go on Jeopardy and, win the big thing. More steel and concrete in my brain than I probably should. Moral of the story is, all the stuff I learned at Florida, we didn't talk about behavioral and psychology 101. And that's where 80% of my business lies, is changing that behavior. What you're going to need to do when you're thinking about changing your business, what's going to happen when you leave here? And you got to go back and start to say, first of all, the pain is enough. We're not making the money we'd like. And I hear so many companies go, Greg, first of all, our market's going down. We're losing market share. And we lost a job the other day by $50,000. Can you believe that? $50,000. Those no good stinking competitors of ours. Here's the pushback I always give. I know there are a lot of stupid people doing stupid things and buying work, and doing it for no profit. So let's say that $50,000, of that $50,000, let's say $25,000 is stupidity. Are we also saying that you don't have any opportunity in your business to improve? And that other $25,000. I'm not saying we'd still get there, but so much emphasis is put on what our competitors are doing in the marketplace. And we need to kind of, once again, I can't control what brand X down the street does relative to their prices in steel and erection. What I can control is, are my folks being as productive and as efficient as possible? Are we planning our work as efficiently as we possibly should? Are we pushing down information, or are we kind of holding on at a top level? One of the other things I will say, and this is if you have any questions, as I said, I have some business cards, and I'll email you anything we've got on this. But I had the opportunity last week, and this is kind of just an aside that I wanted to share with you. I was actually up in Manhattan. By the way, I hope you're not wearing shorts in Manhattan. It was 34 degrees. I was for the AMCF conference, which is the Association of Management Consulting Firms. We were one of the finalists for the Change Management Award. It's basically our version of SCAA in consulting world. Well, I had an opportunity to hear a speaker by the name of Gary Hamel. He's a London Business School professor, and those of you who have read Good to Great by Jim Collins, he is the new Jim Collins. He was recognized by Wall Street Journal as the business mind of the 2000s. Well, I tell you that because he actually told us a story about how in so many companies we unfortunately do not push down the right level of information to the people that need it the most. He said, think about this. If I looked at your org chart, and we call it SAM and POC. Leaders set direction, align resources, and motivate others. That's the SAM. POC is planning, organizing, controlling. And we say let's say our foreman, well, we want them to be just focused on POC, planning, organizing, controlling. President, CEO, CFO should be setting direction, aligning resources, motivating. And he put that on the board, and he said, what kind of message does this send to people in your organization when someone in the field shouldn't think strategically? Think about that. They shouldn't innovate. They should just be kind of like factory workers. And he said, it got him thinking. He said, there's this one company that said, first of all, we're going to throw out titles. We're going to truly there's no management here. If you have an idea, you can make an idea happen and innovate your business. And it's this tomato picking company. This is the fascinating part because I saw a great corollary to the construction industry. This tomato picking business, they have empowered any person in their company they can make a capital investment. Think about this for a second. Make a capital investment in a combine, a tomato picking machine, whatever that thing looks like. They can go out there and write a check as a farmer. This would be the equivalent of your foreman deciding he wanted to go out and buy a new crane, a new crawler crane. Think about that. And some of you are getting real anxious when I said that. Now, he said this, and someone raised their hand, one of the consultants in the room says, wait a second here. So you're telling me anybody in that company can just go ahead and write checks? He said, yep. However, he goes, this company, when he had the opportunity to consult with them, he said, we had this situation where we talked to the farmer about it, or the lead farmer, the owner of the business. And he said, first of all, I am very passionate about training my people. And we've created such an infrastructure that I would put my farmers up against UMBAs out there any day of the week. Meaning they can calculate MPV, IRR, all the things that make them money. So when they're going and writing this check for $100,000, they understand that there's a payback, and they can calculate it better than most people can even balance their checkbook. And he said, you know what? At the second level, we hold people accountable. If they want to go out and buy something and to make them more innovative or more effective or more productive, great. At the end of the year, we look at it and say, first of all, you didn't pull through. What happened here? And we cut people loose that don't understand that. So we train them, but we also hold them accountable, but we push down decision-making at that level. And that really kind of got me thinking about, do we empower our people? And one good test to consider is go to people in your organization and ask them, walk up to your receptionist on Monday morning and say, if you had an idea to innovate, how would you go about implementing it? Some people will put on their business cards, we're an innovative, we're a safe company, yet that really only means the people at the corner level offices think strategically and innovate. It means we don't really empower the rest of our company to innovate and think. And one of the mechanical contractors this week said, but wait a second here. I don't know if I trust my service techs or my field guys to think like that. I said, well, first of all, you're probably not training them the right way. You're not training them to think like that. And secondly, how about this? You go to a 7-Eleven at the corner, you know, they have a cash drawer. You know, those folks are, I don't know what a 7-Eleven clerk is making, but they're probably making, you know, maybe minimum wage or a little above minimum wage. Yeah, they got a cash drawer with thousands of dollars and an entire store full of merchandise. Yet we're worried in a lot of cases about our field managers who are grown adults making decisions in some cases. Now, once again, if we're not willing to train them, put in processes, and hold them accountable, you're absolutely right. But I think in a lot of cases we do manage our businesses to what I call the lowest common denominator. And I'll explain that one. But was up in Winnipeg, Canada with a client recently, and we were talking about something like short interval planning. And one of the project managers said to me, we were talking about getting their foreman to do a short interval 1 week look ahead. And he said, man, my foreman, and tell me if you've ever heard this before, my foreman won't do that because they don't think they get paid enough to do that. They don't like paper. They want an extra 15 minutes added to their paycheck, I don't know whether that's just a Canadian mindset or if that's just, well, it was funny because the CEO, Brad, walked by at the exact moment he heard that. And he walked in the room, he said, so let me understand this. A foreman doesn't want to be a foreman. So who should do that work? And the project manager said, well, I've been doing it for my foreman. He goes, yeah, but I pay you to be a project manager, so who's doing the project manager work while you're doing the foreman's job? He goes, well, Julian, and Julian is their general manager. We're managing down levels. Instead of pushing information down levels, we're managing down levels, which is the dangerous part. And Brad said it best. He goes, we are just simply managing to the lowest common denominator. I will not accept that. And he goes, and the PM kind of pushed back. They have a kind of a fun organization. He goes, well, wait a second here. What are we going to be like Google now? We're going to all of a sudden, innovate and be all creative and push this decision-making now. And, that's the problem, I think, with our business, construction in general, not steel erectors or fabricators, but construction in general is we don't push ourselves enough to think, can we do some of these things? We accept that status quo. And, in closing, I will tell you that one of the other speakers we had at that convention this past week was the author for the book, The Facebook Effect. Not the movie that you saw, but the actual authorized biography of Zuckerberg. And he said, throughout Facebook's walls in their office out in Silicon Valley, they have a saying that is plastered everywhere. If you ever read a book about it or get to see a seminar on Facebook, the quote is, we're 1% there. We're 1% there. That's fascinating. Here's a company that when they go public very shortly, their market cap will probably be over $1 trillion. They will be one of the largest companies in the world, yet they think they're 1% there. If they think they're 1% there, folks, the rest of us have got a lot of work to do. But the best part about it is, in my mind, in this industry, the construction industry, we have some of the smartest people. This is the engine. You hear about President and Congress talk about growth and jobs, and this truly right here is the exciting part because we build the stuff, once again, very scientific, but the stuff that makes this world go around. We fuel the world, we build it, we make it happen. But we cannot accept mediocrity. And once again, the pushing yourself to change that behavioral inertia, it's got to start with us at the leadership group and push it down, and then getting those people to create the right ways to do things. Bruce, I want to thank you for letting me come in. This has been, I love working with you guys annually. I look forward to hopefully seeing you in New Orleans next year. But enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you, guys. Bruce, thank you.
Thank you.